Spider-Man Far From Home. Yes, I went to a special late night 12:01 a.m. showing of this movie on a Monday night. Very rare you have a midnight showing of a movie on a Monday night, but because of the holidays this week, they went ahead and did that. So Spider-Man Far From Home should be in theaters pretty much for everybody in the U.S. all week, and I went to go see the movie, and I want to give you my thoughts. Now, this is, of course, going to be a non-spoiler review for the film. I will not spoil the movie, but we will talk about spoilers in another video coming out probably in about a day or two. Just give me some time, and I'll have that out. That way it gives other people some time to go see the movie. So I'm going to talk about the movie as much as I can without spoiling it. There will be no spoilers here at all, but Spider-Man Far From Home is the sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming and the newest MCU movie taking place after the events of Avengers Endgame. Now, if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, yeah, we're going to talk about spoilers for Avengers Endgame here for sure because it's the last movie, not the current movie. And the thing about this film is a lot of, at least a lot of what made Homecoming interesting is that it was somewhat of a coming-of-age story. And I was wrong. Spider-Man Far From Home, this movie is the Spider-Man coming-of-age story. Things that were teased in Homecoming, the pieces are now falling together in this film for what the future holds for the characters of Peter Parker and, of course, his friends. However, there were some things that were touched upon and teased in Homecoming that were not addressed in this film. But the main thing about this film is, and the main sort of theme it tackles, is Peter having to deal with the fact that his mentor is gone, and just like his original mentor in the original storyline was his Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. Peter has to learn to be a superhero in this movie without Tony Stark. And the whole film is really like a big love letter to Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., because this is the post-Endgame world that we're living in now. And they do explain a lot of the things that people had questions about, like how the high schools and the education system was able to deal with the snap and what it's being called and how it affected other kids and things like that. All that's dealt with, but, the ramifications of Endgame are a big deal in this movie. Not just like, the snap and the big battle in New York, but more so the or whatever, it was New York, right, where they had the Endgame fight. That's where I think it was upstate New York, but whatever. But the main thing is the passing of Tony Stark, the death of Tony Stark, how it affects all the characters. We're talking about Peter specifically, because it really is his story. Aunt May, of course, is affected, and Happy Hogan as well, and other characters that I'm not going to spoil that were affected by Tony Stark throughout the past. There are some very interesting deep cuts in this movie that go all the way back to Iron Man 1, and it's really interesting how they had that in there in this movie. To me, in my opinion, this was a really fun movie. I had a fun time watching this film in the movie theater, and this is a film that is more enjoyable if you're not spoiled, because the thing about the movie is the storyline and what they did with the characters in this film is really bold and really ballsy. This movie had balls, and the movie really is sort of like two movies here. You have this like teenage, comedy with Peter and his friends and how they interact with each other on this vacation to Europe. Then you have this really interesting sort of sci-fi, cool, superhero flick underneath it, and it all kind of balances itself out pretty well. The first half of the movie is pretty much all comedy. I mean, I'll just say that point blank. It really is comedy with some action sprinkled in, but the final sequence of the film, the big finale, the big fight at the end, I guess you can say, was a lot of fun, and it felt like an episode of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. Like, that last act really felt, I don't want to say rushed, because that show was an adrenaline rush. It definitely was rushed. It was not rushed, but a lot of things happen, and it's not too hard to keep up with it at all. It's not one of those things, but it was executed swiftly, and there really was no room for any kind of slowdown or anything like that. So it was a very well-made movie when it comes to that. Now, there are some things about the movie I did not like. I'm going to get to, real quick, one of them right now, and that's the CGI. Most of the movie looks fine. Most of the stuff looks great. There are a couple of weird scenes in this movie that look really bad. Like, there was one where they show an aircraft landing, and it looks bad. Like, it looks like something from PlayStation 3. And movies shouldn't look like that anymore. It happened a couple times in the movie where the stuff obviously looked fake, and it just bugged me. Now, to me, the acting, the performances of the movie, were really its strong suit. I felt like Tom Holland was very, very lovable, very understanding of a character, having to deal with these responsibilities of being a superhero and having to live in the shadow of Tony Stark, who chose him to be, a major player in the Avengers Initiative, and he has to come to terms with that. But also, Sam Jackson, always good. Colby Summers, playing, Maria Hill, she was great in her scenes, and of course Happy Hogan and his chemistry with Aunt May, with Marissa Tomei, was really good. Now, to me, and this might bring up a disagreement in the comment section, but I honestly felt like the best actor in this movie was Jake Gyllenhaal. Jake Gyllenhaal stole this movie. We're talking about Jake Gyllenhaal. This is a guy who is known for having tremendous performances multiple times. This is a big-time actor now. If you haven't seen Jake Gyllenhaal and his body of work in the last few years, it's astonishing. He has a tremendous, tremendous body of work. And in this movie, playing Mysterio, Quentin Beck, was really awesome because you can tell he was having fun. You can tell he was being cheesy. He was kind of channeling some other real-life people who I'm not going to say who, but you can tell in the movie that he's very, very convincing in the role, and he's really a very smart character, and the whole character arc with Mysterio to me is interesting. I've never been a fan of the Mysterio character as a comic book fan, a Spider-Man fan. I just never thought he was that interesting. Never did. I know others did. He just wasn't my cup of tea. But this is my favorite portrayal of Mysterio I've ever seen. Now, obviously, I haven't read every Mysterio comic, so there's probably some good ones out there. But for the most part, I found the character kind of boring. But this version of Quentin Beck, to me, was really interesting. And how his story ties into, well, not ties into, but more so how his story evolves in the film. And then when they start to kind of reveal more about the character, he gets more and more interesting. And it kind of gets kind of wacky because you can tell that he was having a good time doing this. And I've said that before, like some of these big, like, super, auteur actors do these movies because it's a fun time. Also, I gotta say, Ned Leeds was great. And one thing about the comedy that I mentioned earlier about how the first half is all comedy, not all the jokes hit. All right, there were a couple of cringy, dumb jokes in the first half of the movie. There were some that were great. There was some slapstick here and there, but a lot of it was pretty smart. But there were some really bad jokes where the audience kind of groaned. So that's what happens with these Marvel movies. A lot of them have kind of the same sort of formula with that, and not every joke hits. In Endgame, they all hit a little bit better, I think. People were saying that this film is like on the same scale of Endgame. I disagree with that, but it's definitely much bigger than Homecoming. This is no longer just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man story with, the Vulture and whatnot, Michael Keaton. This is like an actual possible, event that could change the future, and it's up to Spider-Man to kind of figure everything out, so to speak. Again, I'm avoiding spoilers here, but it is a much bigger movie than Homecoming, but not as big as Endgame by far. I mean, it's not. It's still Spider-Man's story. He has some help, of course, with his friends and whatnot, but it's still his story. And when I say his friends, I don't really mean like Ned and MJ, even though they do more stuff in this movie. I mean like Nick Fury and them, you know what I mean? Now, the mid-credit scene was fantastic because of the actor that appears more so than the character. Even though the character was great, it's a really pleasant surprise, really big shock, had a big smile on my face. So happy to see this guy, appear. And then the end credit scene is sort of vague in a way. It is worth staying for. It's a bit vague, but it's teasing a little bit of Phase 4. Now, the mid-credit scene actually sets up a brand new story arc, which is probably going to play out in Phase 4, which tells me that whatever issues that were going on with Marvel, being able to re-sign Spider-Man for more movies, there's no way they can't, because it's not really a cliffhanger. In fact, the mid and post-credit scenes are kind of part of the movie. They actually pick up right after the movie ends. So it's not like it's like a time skip or anything, right? So basically, it's one of those things where the mid-credit scene sets up a story arc for Phase 4, but not a story arc from like the entire MCU, even though I think it will involve the entire MCU, but it does set up another Spider-Man movie and a Spider-Man storyline, which is going to be very interesting going forward. And it's very difficult to guess what it is unless you've seen the movie, because there's a lot of Spider-Man stories, but it's something that, again, like I said with the movie, very, very ballsy. They had balls in this movie. I was very impressed with the stuff they were willing to do here and the direction they're going to be taking Spider-Man in the future, because it's not something we've really seen theatrically. We've never really seen it theatrically. It's a new story, and that same thing applies to the villain of the film, the villains of the film, who I'm not going to reveal in this spoiler review, but let's just say it's something different and something pleasantly different, in my opinion. I thought it was a good change from the norm, and the villains in this movie are definitely in the upper tier of MCU villains. You know, I wouldn't say it's like Thanos or Killmonger level, because those are very special performances, but they were good nonetheless, and they were different. And the scary part is, it's something that could actually happen in the real world. This kind of stuff, I believe, is possible at some point in the future, maybe the far future. So it's one of those kind of scary things that makes you think. Like the villains make you think a lot about what the possibilities are that we can do with what we're given to us. Now, I'll leave that where it is. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you'll know when you see it, because obviously, if you're a fan of the MCU, you're going to go see this movie. I mean, I don't even have to tell you that. Should you go see it? The answer is yes. It is a good movie. However, understand this. It's not perfect at all. There are some really, like I said, the bad CGI, but also the editing. There's some really wonky editing in this movie where scenes cut away too quickly. That to me, it happened like 3 times, and it might not bother somebody else, but it definitely was jarring. It was definitely a jarring sort of way they cut stuff into something else. A little bit weird there. Establishing shots were used, but not quite, as effectively as they should have been. Also, I will say this, and I don't want to sound like the nerd crew here, but the vistas in this movie were great. Like when they went to Italy, when they go to Italy, you want to go to Italy. Like they made Italy look so beautiful, and you're watching the movie, and you're like, man, I want to go there. I want to visit, and that's how the movie makes you feel. Like, man, like, it looks great. You know what I'm saying? They really had some great things there, and also the way that the movie, John Watts, the director of the film, the way that he positioned his shots for the battle scenes, the way the camera moves was very dynamic, way more than in Homecoming. The movie flows and moves at a good pace. I mean, I enjoyed it. I really liked the film. I do not think this movie is better than Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse was a very special movie, near flawless writing in that film. I feel like in this movie there were some flaws. Also, in my opinion, I think this movie is better than Homecoming, not better than Spider-Verse, and not better than Spider-Man 2. And I think a lot of people said that it was. I disagree. However, I will say this. MJ, the character of MJ, even though it's not the traditional Mary Jane that we know of, the redhead, MJ in this film, to me, is way better than any of the Raimi MJs, to me. She's way more interesting. She's way cooler. This MJ is better than the Raimi MJ, which I know some folks are like, duh, but she does a lot more in this film. And the evolution of the friendship of Peter and MJ, those two characters do get a good arc here, and their story continues, and I do like where it's going. Like, it's really setting things up for a bright future when it comes to Spider-Man. I don't know how many more movies they're going to do. I guess we'll find out when we in San Diego Comic-Con, when they do the panel where they're supposed to reveal Phase 4, the movies, because, like I said, Spider-Man can't possibly be finished in the MCU. He just can't. And overall, I mean, I liked the film a lot. Was it as good as Endgame or Infinity War? No, I mean, it's not. It's in the upper tier of MCU movies. It's better than Captain Marvel. I know some folks are like, well, yeah, that's not much. But no, it is. It is better. I still like Thor Ragnarok more, Iron Man 1 more. I got to think about where I would rank it right now. I've watched it again, see how it holds up. But it was a fun time, and I think you'll have a good time too. So anyways, spoiler review is coming in the future. Keep an eye out for that. Subscribe if you have not here to World of Geekdom. I thank you for watching, and I will talk to y'all very soon. The spoiler review for the movie very soon. So go enjoy it if you haven't. I think you'll like it. Even if you're not a hardcore MCU fan, you're a Spider-Man fan, if you want to have a good time, check it out. And bye.